We have, in my view, a system of injustice whose center is within the Department of Justice, especially the criminal division of the U.S. Department of Justice. The problem lies not with one administration or another, though one administration or another may act more positively or more negatively. You have permanent civil service employees, like Deputy Assistant Attorneys General Jack Keeney and Mark Richard, who are coordinators of a nest of institutions in the criminal division, which show up repeatedly as leading or key associates of every legal atrocity which I've seen. This is the case with the so-called Frumention operation, which is largely an FBI operation, but cannot run without cooperation from these people and their assistants. The case of the demoniac case, which is outstanding, of a man who they, according to the Sixth Circuit, a man who the Justice Department knew to be innocent of the charges they were making against him at the time they made the charges. And yet Mark Richard and Jack Keeney and so forth proceeded with that case and attempted to secure the execution of this man in Israel over the objections of the Israeli government for an OSI operation which was set into place by Henry Kissinger some years before. You have the case of the Weaver case, the same thing. The much celebrated case of the Waco case, the same complex of injustice. We have an out-of-control Justice Department, in my view, where the rot is not in the appointees as much as it is in the permanent bureaucracy. We have a permanent sickness in the permanent bureaucracy of part of our government. In my case, when the time came that somebody wanted me out of the way, they were able to rely upon that permanent injustice in the permanent bureaucracy of government to do the job. As in the Frumention case, the Weaver case, the Waco case, the case of Waldheim, the case of Demoniac, in other cases, always there's that agency inside the Justice Department which works for contract like a hitman when somebody with the right credentials and passwords walks in and says, we want to get this group of people or we want to get this person. My case may be, as Ramsey Clark described it, the most extensive and the highest level of these cases in terms of the duration and scope of the operation, which came to involve the Soviet government. It came to involve the East German Stasi intelligence service. It involves collaboration between the Department of Justice and the Stasi in the case of Palmer's murder case. It involved direct collaboration between, as I say, the Soviet government, the Soviet press, particularly from about off and on, under Andropov beginning the 1984. And then when Gorbachev came in again, 85 to 86 into 88, the Soviet press vilification of me in collaboration with the same line as the US press exceeded that of anything since Stalin's time in the Soviet press against any private individual in history. And it was part of the same operation. So my case is important in the sense it's more extensive, it's more deep-going, long-going. But when it came to getting me, it was the same apparatus that I find, in my opinion, was used in these other cases. And that until we remove from our system of government a rotten, permanent bureaucracy which acts like contract assassins, using the authority of the justice system to perpetrate assassination, this country is not free, nor anyone in it. My general impression from being in prison and meeting these fellows, and I know these fellows, you get in prison and you get my experience, you know the people you're with. Well, they're all perpetrators, most of them. A few cases are really innocent, framed up. But most of them were drug cases or something else, and you knew they were in the group of people they accused of being a group in. But when I saw the paperwork, I was astonished. I saw totally counterproductive sentences. I saw a shameful proceeding that our federal court system, our federal criminal justice system is out of control. And it appears to me that this nest around Mark Richard and Jack Keeney and others in the permanent bureaucracy of the Justice Department if they're not the heart of the problem, they're close enough to it that if you pull out that cancer, you may find out where the next one is. That's my view of the matter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything you ask me, of course.
You and I had a little chat in Selma, Alabama, and you were saying to me that, well, I had raised to you about affirmative action. And I think your phrase was that it was a red herring. And I didn't get a chance to say to you that it is a red herring, but whole states are buying it. And for a little black fella sitting off 20% of the population, this government has not been in touch with me since Lyndon Johnson said he wouldn't run again, and I had a lot of reservations about him. But sitting back as a little black fella, and I see entire states marching in lockstep and accepting this red herring as gospel, I guess you can understand that even somebody like me sometimes feel overwhelmed, and whether or not America is just a lost cause. I hate to sound that way, but after 40 years, I got serious reservations about whether we can save this country, about whether this country even wants to be saved.
Well, I take an evangelical view of this. I've been associated with many lost causes in my life, as you have.
Yeah.
And once in a while we win them. The point is, government, we're coming to a time, look at what's happened in France, as an example. We had a Gingrich type who just got fired. He got resigned. That is, his prime minister told him he'd accept his resignation pronto, by the name of Madeleine. Madeleine is the translator into French of the works of Friedrich von Hayek. Friedrich von Hayek was a British agent of Austrian origin who was the founder of the Mont Pelerin Society. And if you want to know everything that's right-wing and extremely right-wing in economics in the United States, you can generally trace it to the Mont Pelerin Society. But Madeleine was fired, and the Prime Minister of France, Juppé, made a public statement explaining the resignation, or the induced resignation, or forced resignation of Juppé, of Madeleine. He said, this country, France, has a commitment to ensure that there are enough jobs for the people of France. And Madeleine was on the other program, and he had to go. Now, we've had an experience in this country with Roosevelt, who shouldn't be exaggerated, Franklin Roosevelt, that is. But nonetheless, we had an experience which is very important for us, is that it is the function of the federal government in particular, through its public works program, its infrastructure responsibility under our Constitution, implicitly, and through the ability to generate credit, as we did with space programs, and we did with wartime buildup for war, to use the public credit to create enough jobs to get the job done. I saw Alabama. That's what the problem is there, not enough jobs. And the federal government, this country, under an economic crisis, can do what Roosevelt did and better, because we can learn from the experience. Our job is not affirmative action to share out the shrinking number of jobs available. Our job is to create the jobs and to create at the same time the matching educational facilities and the support programs which turn the unemployed, who are not taxpayers because they don't have any income to be part of the tax revenue base, to become a contributing member of society and a part of the tax revenue base. And there's nothing that stops us except crazy ideology from following our Constitution and its original intent and doing just that, as Lincoln did. We can do it again. There's no need for somebody begging out in the street to get somebody else's job. There's a lot of work to be done. You just look at the Tom Bigby project and what should have been done to complete that. That'll keep people busy for a long time. You take the American water system. Our aquifers are turning into sewers when they're not going dry because we're not building a water project, which we need. We don't have enough power. We have 20%. When we came out of World War II, there were 60% of us in the labor force were producing material goods. Today, less than 20%. We have coupon clippers, we have unemployed, we have people in prison. but 20% are producing. Our standard of living in the United States today, in physical terms, if you include healthcare, education, science and technology, plus the things you physically consume, we're half of what we were 25 years ago. We're about that in productivity. This nation is going down the sewer. The world's going down the sewer. We have the means, and government has the means, to turn it around. When enough people in this country stand up on their hind legs and stop voting for what they don't want, or for a result they don't want. And I think that if the problem with people, as I see it, is people don't trust the leadership, and I don't blame them for not trusting their leadership. I blame them for being too pessimistic. And it's up to us and others to get enough people moving to create a movement. Like the case just of Martin Luther King. Now, I never personally met Martin Luther King, but I watched him closely. And I know something about Martin Luther King from people who knew him and his circumstances. And here's a man who's a good man, he's a preacher, Baptist preacher, I don't know, they run to this way and that way. But one day somebody appointed him, nominated him to be a leader of the civil rights movement, out of a crowd, so to speak. He took the job as an appointee, like a federal appointee, only this was the civil rights movement. He went from crisis to crisis in a few years from the time that he received that appointment until he went to his death, knowing he was facing death. And in that period of time, he made a number of public speeches of great power and pith. Each of those speeches corresponded to a point of crisis in the history of the civil rights movement. And I saw on television, and I read in the recorded speeches, I read a man who had gone into private, into his own Gethsemane, probably inspired by reading the New Testament, and said, I will drink of this cup. And he came out with an idea, with a lot of people swarming around him. But he came out with the idea, and he presented a concept which took a whole people who were looking to him in the civil rights movement, and he ennobled them. He said, you're not fighting for African American rights, you're fighting for everybody's rights. You're fighting to make the Constitution real. And it was a new idea, a different idea. And as he did with his mountain speech that he gave just before he went, again, a man who had walked into Gethsemane and said, yes, Lord, I will drink of this cup as my Savior before me. And he went out and he drank of the cup, and he inspired people. Now, we don't know who among us is going to be the great leader of this period. But we know, as the civil rights people of the 1960s who had been in the civil rights business for many centuries, in point of fact, many of them of the conscious family tradition, they assembled together. They picked people from their midst as leaders. And among these leaders was Martin Luther King. And I think if enough of us assemble today around these kinds of issues and show the nation that there is something moving, something which is of concern to the average citizen, that from among those we gather, together for that purpose, we will find the leaders we need.